I only have one child who makes me proud. As for the other one, she's my biggest mistake. Honestly, I should have given her away when she was a baby." The words echoed through the massive, crystal chandelier-lit ballroom of the Silverwood Estate in California. There were exactly 800 guests in attendance, all dressed in their absolute best, holding expensive champagne flutes and picking at plates of high-end catering. Just a few seconds ago, the room was filled with the warm, polite laughter and applause that you expect at a high-society wedding. Now, you could hear a pin drop. The silence was heavy, thick, and incredibly suffocating. My mother, Victoria Carter, stood confidently at the microphone, looking absolutely stunning in her custom designer gown. She is a famous businesswoman and a beloved philanthropist, known by everyone in the state for her charity work and her seemingly endless generosity. She had just spent the last 10 minutes giving a glowing, tear-jerking speech about my older brother, Ethan. Ethan is a successful doctor, the ultimate golden boy, the absolute pride and joy of our family. Tonight was his wedding night, and he was sitting at the center of a head table next to his beautiful new wife, Olivia Grant. Everyone in that room fully expected Victoria to raise her crystal glass, wish the happy newlyweds a lifetime of joy and prosperity, and gracefully sit back down. Instead, she tightened her grip on the microphone and decided to use Ethan's wedding as a stage to publicly destroy me, her 25-year-old daughter, Lena. I sat at the end of the head table, just a few feet away from her. The moment those words left her mouth, I felt 800 pairs of eyes shift violently from my mother to me. People were staring in absolute, unfiltered shock. I saw mouths literally drop open. Some people gasped out loud. Then, the frantic whispering started, spreading across the room like wildfire. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a few guests subtly raising their phones, their screens glowing brightly as they started recording the disaster unfolding in front of them. If Victoria expected me to burst into tears, cover my face, run out of the room, or scream at her in a fit of rage, she was deeply disappointed. I didn't cry. I didn't shed a single tear. I didn't even flinch or look away. Instead, I looked right into her cold eyes and I smiled. A calm, genuine smile that I stood up slowly, deliberately smoothed out the fabric of my dress, and pushed my chair in so it wouldn't make a sound. I didn't say a single word to her, to Ethan, or to anyone else. I just turned around and started walking toward the exit. The crowd actually parted for me like the Red Sea. Nobody knew what to say or do. They just stepped out of my way, their eyes glued to me. As I walked out of the heavy, grand oak doors of the ballroom, leaving the music and the party behind, only one clear thought crossed my mind. You just chose your stage. I walked steadily to the valet stand, handed over my ticket, got my car keys, and drove away from the towering gates of the Silverwood Estate into the dark, cool California night. I didn't have a specific destination right away. I just needed to put physical distance between myself and that toxic environment. I needed to pull over and breathe. A few miles down the winding road, I found a quiet, empty spot near a lookout point and stopped the car, shifting it into park. The rush of adrenaline was finally starting to wear off, but surprisingly, I wasn't sad. I wasn't heartbroken. I was incredibly, intensely focused that I reached into my purse on the passenger seat and pulled out my worn leather wallet. Carefully hidden inside a zippered compartment were 3 old, slightly faded photographs. I pulled them out and looked at them under the dim, flickering yellow light of the street lamp above my car. These 3 pictures were the absolute foundation of a meticulous plan I had been working on for exactly 7 years. I stared at the first picture. It was a photo of me when I was just 13 years old. I was standing awkwardly on a stage, holding my wooden violin with a cheap but shiny gold medal around my neck. I had just won the city violin competition against dozens of other talented kids. It was one of the biggest, proudest days of my life back then. I had practiced until my fingers bled just to make her proud. But if you look closely at the background of that picture, you can see the front row of the audience. The seat right in the middle, the one clearly reserved with a name tag for my mother, was completely empty. Victoria didn't show up. She didn't even call. She was too busy attending a high-profile charity gala that night, making sure the local press took plenty of pictures of her smiling, holding giant checks, and shaking hands with politicians. I remember standing backstage all by myself after the competition was over, watching all the other kids hugging their parents, crying happy tears, and taking family photos. That was the exact moment the illusion shattered for me. That was when I truly realized the truth about my mother. To Victoria Carter, her public image, her reputation as a saint, was always going to be vastly more important than her actual, living daughter. I was just an accessory to her life, and a defective one at that, because I didn't fit perfectly into her flawless, manufactured narrative that I put the first photo down on the dashboard and picked up the second one. This one featured my grandfather, Thomas Carter, smiling warmly at the camera. He was Victoria's father, but he was the exact opposite of her in every conceivable way. He was kind, grounded, incredibly patient, and he actually loved me for exactly who I was. Flaws and all that. I vividly remember a painful conversation I had with him years ago, right after one of Victoria's classic, unhinged screaming matches where she criticized everything from my grades to the way I styled my hair. I was crying uncontrollably in his study, asking my grandpa why my own mother hated me so much, what I had done wrong to deserve her constant anger, that he looked at me with this incredibly sad, knowing expression, put his hand on my shoulder, and told me something I never forgot. He said, "Your mother doesn't hate you, Lena. She hates that you don't make her look perfect." It was a harsh, bitter truth to swallow, but it finally helped me understand her twisted mindset. She viewed me purely as a public relations liability. Grandpa Thomas was the only person in that massive, cold, silent house who ever tried to protect me from her wrath. He shielded me from her worst emotional outbursts and made sure I knew, deep down, that I had value as a human being. But he passed away suddenly when I was just 17 years old. When he died, my only shield was gone. I was left completely alone and defenseless with Victoria and my brother Ethan, who had already learned to perfectly mimic our mother's behavior and agree with everything she said just to stay in her good graces. Let me give you some more context about Ethan and Olivia's wedding so you understand exactly how calculated and insane this moment was. The Silverwood Estate is not just a regular venue. It's the kind of exclusive, ultra-expensive place where A-list celebrities get married. The floral arrangements alone probably cost more than my entire car. Victoria happily paid for the entire thing, of course, because it was the perfect, highly visible opportunity to show off her wealth to her elite friends, her wealthy business partners, and the media outlets she constantly courted. Ethan certainly didn't mind her taking over. He is a doctor, which is a great, respectable career, but he absolutely loves the luxury lifestyle. He has always been the golden boy. In Victoria's eyes, Ethan can do no wrong. He went to the right Ivy League schools, chose the right prestigious profession, and now he was marrying the absolutely perfect woman. Olivia Grant comes from a very prominent, wealthy family. She's gorgeous, and she fits perfectly into the pristine Carter family aesthetic that I was only invited to the wedding because it would look terrible to the press and the guests if the daughter of the great, charitable Victoria Carter wasn't present at her own brother's milestone event. I was handed a dress to wear, told exactly which table to sit at, and strictly instructed to smile, keep my mouth shut, and stay out of the way. I did exactly that. I ate my catered dinner in silence. I politely clapped when Ethan and Olivia had their romantic first dance, and I kept entirely to myself. I didn't drink any alcohol. I didn't speak out of turn. I didn't cause a scene. I was just quietly existing in the background, and yet, she still couldn't help herself. Victoria has this deep, psychological sickness where she always needs to be the absolute center of attention, but she also desperately needs a scapegoat to highlight how gracious, resilient, and long-suffering she is as a mother. By pointing at me in front of 800 people and calling me her biggest mistake, she was trying to play the ultimate victim. She wanted everyone in that room to think, "Oh, poor Victoria, such a perfect, giving woman, burdened with such a disappointing, ungrateful daughter," but saying out loud into a microphone that she should have given me away when I was a baby. That crossed a massive line, even for a narcissist like her. That wasn't just a passive-aggressive comment. That was a public execution designed to humiliate me beyond repair. As I sat in my car, staring at the old photo of Grandpa Thomas, I realized that Victoria's horrific speech tonight was actually a strange sort of gift. For 7 long years, I had been painstakingly building a massive case against her. I had been digging through records, researching shell companies, and quietly gathering hard evidence of exactly who she really was behind closed doors. But I always hesitated. No matter how terrible she was, destroying your own mother is a massive, life-altering step. A small part of me always wondered if I was going too far, if maybe there was still a chance we could just go our separate ways quietly and never speak again. Tonight, she finally gave me my answer. By humiliating me in front of 800 guests, her vital business partners, Ethan's new powerful in-laws, and half the city's elite, she proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that she would never, ever stop trying to crush me. She fired the final shot, and by doing so, she severed whatever tiny thread of obligation I had left, giving me the absolute freedom to finally execute my plan without a single ounce of guilt. I finally put down the picture of Grandpa Thomas and picked up the last photograph. The third picture in my wallet was a candid, slightly blurry shot of my Aunt Elena. Her full name was Elena Ward, and she was Victoria's younger sister, but honestly, you would never guess they were related if you saw them standing next to each other in the same room. While Victoria was all about cold, calculated perfection and maintaining an impeccable public image, Aunt Elena was loud, a little messy, and fiercely independent. But more importantly than any of that, she was the only person in our entire extended family who ever dared to stand up to Victoria. Elena saw right through the expensive charity galas, the custom designer clothes, and the fake, camera-ready smiles. She knew exactly who my mother really was behind closed doors, and she was never afraid to call her out on her lies. Did I clearly remember the last time I ever saw her alive? I was 18 years old, sitting in her cramped, brightly colored living room, drinking cheap store-bought tea. The mood was unusually heavy that day. She looked at me with this intense, deeply worried expression that I had never seen on her face before. She leaned in close, lowered her voice, and told me something that would forever change the trajectory of my life. She said, "Your mother is hiding things that could completely destroy her." I didn't fully understand what she meant at the time. I was just a teenager, so I assumed she was talking about Victoria's general cruelty behind the scenes, or maybe some minor corporate tax evasion. But exactly 2 months after she said those chilling words to me, Aunt Elena died in a horrific car accident. The local police did a quick, standard investigation at the scene and officially concluded that it was just a tragic, unavoidable accident. They claimed she simply lost control of the wheel on a slippery, winding road. But I knew Elena. I knew she was a painfully cautious driver who never sped and always took care of her vehicle. I never believed the official police report for a single second. Her sudden, violent death was the exact catalyst that started my massive plan. It was the exact moment I decided I needed to find out exactly what Victoria was so desperate to keep hidden, sitting in my car tonight, with the echo of Victoria's humiliating wedding speech still ringing loudly in my ears. I knew it was finally time to stop reminiscing and start acting. I carefully put the 3 photos back into my wallet, started the car engine, and drove straight back to my small, quiet apartment. The moment I walked through my front door, I didn't even bother taking off my formal dress or kicking off my uncomfortable heels. I walked straight over to my desk, sat down, and immediately opened my laptop. My hands were actually shaking a little bit, not from fear or sadness, but from pure, concentrated adrenaline. I typed in a complex, 24-character password and opened a heavily encrypted, hidden folder on my hard drive that I had simply named Insurance Files. This single digital folder was the absolute culmination of 7 agonizing years of secret, obsessive, and highly dangerous investigation. I had spent countless sleepless nights digging through obscure public records, quietly hacking into poorly secured corporate servers, and tracking down disgruntled former employees who were willing to talk off the record. Inside this folder was a massive, undeniable mountain of hard evidence, hundreds of private bank statements, highly confidential internal company emails, completely fabricated business contracts, and even secret, unconsented audio recordings. The first major secret I uncovered during my years of relentless digging was about Victoria's highly publicized charity, the Golden Horizon Foundation. This foundation was the absolute crown jewel of her public image. She used it constantly to host lavish fundraising dinners, rub shoulders with powerful politicians, and paint herself in the media as a modern-day saint who cared deeply about underprivileged children. But the financial records I managed to pull from a hidden shell company in the Cayman Islands told a completely different, horrifying story. Victoria hadn't just mismanaged a few donations. She had deliberately and systematically embezzled $22 million directly from the charity. The money that was legally meant for building schools and providing clean water for kids had instead been quietly funneled into her private offshore accounts, funding her luxury real estate purchases and paying for Ethan's exorbitant medical school tuition. But the massive financial crimes, as terrible as they were, weren't even the worst part of the folder. The second secret I found in those files was the one that completely shattered my entire sense of identity. It was the most cruel, devastating discovery of my entire life. A few years ago, I was digging through an old, archived email server belonging to Victoria's former legal team when I found a digitized copy of my own birth certificate, along with a series of heavily sealed court documents. The truth hit me like a freight train. I am not Victoria's biological daughter. I am not Ethan's real sister. Victoria legally adopted me from a small, severely underfunded orphanage when I was exactly 6 months old. The private emails clearly outlined her true motivation, and it was sickening. She didn't adopt me out of the goodness of her heart. She didn't want a second child to love and nurture. Her elite PR team had explicitly recommended that adopting a baby from a disadvantaged background would be the ultimate, perfect strategy to permanently solidify her public image as a deeply compassionate, generous, and selfless woman. I was quite literally purchased to be a human prop for her personal brand. But as I grew older, the plan backfired. I developed my own personality. I didn't look like her, I didn't act like her, and I absolutely refused to blindly follow her strict, suffocating rules the way Ethan always did. I quickly transitioned from being her perfect little PR stunt into her biggest daily liability. I became the imperfect, flawed child that actively ruined her meticulously crafted narrative of the perfect American family. That is exactly why she always looked at me with such deep, undisguised disgust. That is why she felt comfortable telling 800 people tonight that she should have given me away when I was a baby. Because to her, I was never a daughter, I was just a defective product she couldn't return to the store. As if finding out my entire life was a calculated PR stunt wasn't enough to break me, there was a third major secret hidden deeply inside the insurance files. And this was the specific discovery that made my blood run ice cold and turned my lingering resentment into pure, unadulterated hatred. It was a locked subfolder dedicated entirely to Aunt Elena's fatal car crash. After years of tracking down the exact people involved in the physical aftermath of her accident, I finally managed to get my hands on the original, unredacted mechanics bills and a leaked private inspection report of her wrecked car. The local police had barely looked at the vehicle before officially sending it off to the city scrapyard, but the private insurance inspector had quietly noted something deeply disturbing. There was clear, undeniable physical evidence that the brake lines on Elena's car had been intentionally tampered with and completely destroyed before she ever started the engine that fatal day. That I didn't stop there. I dug much deeper into the specific mechanic who had supposedly serviced her car just 2 days before the crash. I meticulously traced his employment history and his recent bank deposits. He didn't just work at some random local auto shop. He was technically listed as an independent contractor, but his primary, most lucrative client was a massive logistics company that was entirely owned and operated by Victoria Carter. She had paid him a massive, completely untraceable cash bonus the exact same week Aunt Elena died. I don't just suspect foul play anymore. I know it for an absolute fact. I firmly believe, with every fiber of my being, that Victoria orchestrated the sabotage of that car and indirectly caused the brutal, violent death of her own sister, simply to keep her dark financial secrets permanently buried. Sitting there in my dark, silent apartment tonight, staring at the harsh, glowing screen of my laptop, I realized that all the pieces of the puzzle were finally locked into place. I had the clear motive, I had the undeniable financial records, I had the heartbreaking adoption papers, and I had the bloody mechanics trail. My mother wasn't just a narcissist or a terrible parent. She was a ruthless, calculating, and violent criminal who destroyed human lives without a second thought. And tonight, by publicly humiliating me at Ethan's wedding, she actually thought she had won. She thought she had finally broken my spirit in front of the entire world. She had absolutely no idea what was coming for her. I closed the insurance files folder, picked up my cell phone from the desk, and slowly scrolled through my contacts. It was time to stop hiding. It was time to bring in the one person who could help me take all of this evidence public and burn her massive empire straight to the ground. I sat in the dark for a long time, the glow of my laptop screen casting a pale, cold light across my face. I needed a strong, capable ally. I knew I could not just post these confidential files on random social media accounts and hope for the best. Victoria's public relations team was a massive, well-oiled, highly funded machine. If I just leaked the documents online anonymously, her highly paid lawyers would instantly claim they were completely fabricated. They would issue a swift press release calling me a mentally unstable, jealous daughter seeking desperate attention after being rightfully called out at my brother's wedding. I needed someone with serious credibility, someone who knew exactly how to bypass massive corporate legal threats and get the absolute truth directly to the public. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my encrypted contact list until I found the specific name I was looking for. The contact was saved under a fake name, but the number actually belonged to Adrian Cole. Adrian was a seasoned, relentless, and highly respected investigative journalist. I had been closely following his work for years. He was famous in our city for completely dismantling a corrupt real estate conglomerate 2 years ago, ignoring all their threats and bribes. He didn't care about wealth or elite social status, and he absolutely hated people who used the cover of charity as a shield for criminal activity. I drafted a short, highly secure email to his public tip line. I didn't give him my real name or mention Victoria directly. I simply wrote that I had undeniable, hard physical evidence of massive fraud, systemic embezzlement, and a violent cover-up involving the biggest philanthropic foundation in the entire state. I told him to meet me at a specific, rundown 24-hour diner on the extreme outskirts of the city at 6 o'clock the next morning. I hit send, finally closed my laptop, and tried to force myself to get a few hours of sleep. The next morning, the sky was a heavy, dull gray, and a cold, light drizzle was falling over the quiet city streets. I drove slowly to the diner, parked my car in the empty back lot, and walked inside. It was a cheap, greasy, badly lit place, exactly the kind of environment where nobody from Victoria's elite, wealthy social circle would ever be caught dead. I sat in a sticky, torn vinyl booth in the far back corner and ordered a black coffee. At exactly 6 o'clock, a man walked through the front glass door. He looked incredibly tired, wearing a faded jacket and carrying a battered leather messenger bag. I recognized him immediately from his author photos online. It was Adrian Cole. He quickly scanned the room, spotted me sitting completely alone in the back, and walked over. He slid into the booth across from me and didn't bother with any polite small talk. He just looked at me, his eyes narrowing in slight surprise. He obviously recognized me right away. Anyone who read the local society pages or watched the local news knew exactly who Lena Carter was. He asked me point-blank what the privileged daughter of the great Victoria Carter was doing in a miserable place like this, offering him a massive corporate scandal that I didn't answer his question directly. Instead, I reached deep into my coat pocket, pulled out a small, black USB flash drive, and slid it across the scratch table. I told him that absolutely everything he needed to know about my mother's flawless, untouchable public empire was right there on that drive. I told him to open it right now, and if he didn't firmly believe it was the biggest, most explosive story of his entire journalism career, I would walk out the door and never contact him again. Adrian looked skeptically at the flash drive, then back up at my face. Slowly, he reached into his bag, pulled out his own heavily encrypted laptop, and booted it up. He plugged the small drive in and clicked on the main folder I had labeled insurance files. I sat perfectly silently, sipping my terrible, bitter coffee, watching his face intently as he started reading through the documents. For the first 10 minutes, his expression was just professionally curious. He was quickly clicking through the offshore bank statements and the internal corporate emails regarding the Golden Horizon Foundation. But then, I saw his eyes widen dramatically. He leaned much closer to the screen. He was looking at the exact, highlighted routing numbers that proved beyond a doubt that Victoria had systematically embezzled $22 million directly from her own children's charity. He muttered a sharp curse word under his breath and started typing rapidly, cross-referencing the specific dates on the documents with public tax filings he had on his own hard drive. Then, he opened the second hidden subfolder. I watched closely as he read through the highly confidential, sealed legal emails between Victoria and her old crisis PR team. He was reading the exact strategic business plan outlining how legally adopting a 6-month-old baby from a severely underfunded orphanage would perfectly boost her public image and secure her a specific humanitarian award. He looked up at me for a split second, a profound flash of genuine sympathy and disgust in his eyes, before looking back down at the screen. He now understood exactly why I was sitting across from him. He saw the cold, calculated cruelty of my entire existence in that toxic family. Finally, he opened the very last folder. The one dedicated entirely to my Aunt Elena. The diner was completely quiet except for the low hum of the broken refrigerator and the rapid sound of Adrian clicking his mouse. He carefully read through the unredacted private insurance inspection report. He examined the hidden, untraceable bank transfers from Victoria's massive logistics company to the independent mechanic just days before Elena's fatal car crash. He read the undeniable, physical proof that the brake lines on her car had been deliberately and cleanly cut. Adrian slowly pushed the laptop away from him and took a deep, shaky breath. He ran his hands over his face, looking completely overwhelmed by the sheer, terrifying magnitude of the crimes documented on that small piece of plastic. He stared at me for a very long time. The silence between us felt incredibly heavy and loaded with tension. Finally, he leaned forward over the table, keeping his voice extremely low, and said, "If this is published, your mother will lose absolutely everything." He wasn't exaggerating to be dramatic. He knew exactly what this meant in the real world. This wasn't just a mildly embarrassing social scandal that would temporarily ruin her reputation. This was the kind of massive, undeniable evidence that would send her to federal prison for a very long time. It would completely dismantle her entire business empire overnight, freeze all of her global assets, and completely destroy my brother Ethan's perfect, privileged life by association. Adrian wanted to make absolutely sure I was emotionally prepared for the absolute nuclear fallout of this release that I didn't hesitate for a single second. I didn't blink. I looked right back into his eyes and gave him my final, definitive answer. She took everything from me first. Adrian nodded slowly, tapping his fingers on the table. He understood completely. This wasn't about petty, childish revenge for a bad wedding speech. This was about tearing down a dangerous, violent monster. He told me that he needed exactly 48 hours to independently verify the offshore bank routing numbers, privately contact a few trusted legal sources, and properly format the massive story for simultaneous publication across 3 major national news outlets. He said the digital evidence was rock solid, but Victoria was an incredibly powerful, deeply connected woman. If we were going to strike, we had to make sure there was absolutely zero room for her to spin the narrative or claim the documents were just stolen out of context. We needed a definitive, undeniable verbal confirmation directly from her own mouth. We needed a live confession. I told Adrian I knew exactly how to get one. Victoria was incredibly arrogant. She was absolutely confident in her own superiority, especially right now. She honestly believed she had completely broken my spirit at Ethan's wedding. She thought I was weak, humiliated, and utterly defeated. We could easily use that massive, blinding ego directly against her. Right there in the diner booth, I pulled out my phone and opened my text messages. I forced myself to type out a direct message to my mother. I kept it short, pathetic, and exactly what she would expect from a crawling, defeated, dependent child. I typed, "I am sorry about the wedding night. I want to talk privately." I hit send and placed the phone face up on the table right next to Adrian's laptop. We didn't even have to wait long. Less than 2 minutes later, the screen lit up brightly with a reply from Victoria. She agreed immediately. She told me to meet her for a private family dinner at her favorite, highly exclusive downtown restaurant later that exact week. She even deliberately added that Ethan and his new wife, Olivia, would be there too. In her twisted, cruel mind, she obviously wanted an audience to watch me beg for her forgiveness. She firmly believed that I was returning to the fold, completely broken and ready to submit to her rules again. I showed the glowing text message to Adrian. A grim, focused smile appeared on his face. The stage was officially set. Victoria thought she was setting up a dinner to finally put me in my place once and for all. She had absolutely no idea that she was walking straight into a trap that would violently end her entire life as she knew it. I told Adrian to get his hidden recording equipment ready because he was coming to that dinner with me, pretending to be my new supportive friend. The explosion was coming, and I was going to make sure my mother had a front row seat to her own absolute destruction. The private dining room at Le Petit Chateau was suffocatingly elegant, exactly the kind of overpriced, exclusive establishment Victoria preferred for conducting her personal business. When Adrian and I walked through the heavy velvet curtains, my mother was already seated at the head of the long mahogany table, nursing a glass of expensive red wine. Sitting dutifully to her right were my brother Ethan and his brand-new wife Olivia. Ethan looked slightly annoyed to be there, probably viewing this as a tedious interruption to his honeymoon phase, while Olivia just looked incredibly uncomfortable. Victoria had clearly brought them along to serve as her loyal audience, entirely expecting to witness my total submission. Adrian walked in right behind me, dressed in a sharp but understated suit, flawlessly playing the role of a quiet, supportive friend I had supposedly brought along for emotional support. Victoria barely glanced at Adrian. She didn't even bother to ask for his name. Her cold, calculating eyes were completely locked onto me from the moment I sat down at the opposite end of the table. The air in the room was immediately thick and incredibly tense. We hadn't even ordered appetizers yet when she decided to skip the pleasantries and get straight to the point. She placed her wine glass down, steepled her fingers, and looked at me with a sickeningly sweet, condescending smile. She told me that she was willing to be magnanimous. She looked me dead in the eye and said that if I simply apologized for my behavior, she might be able to forget about that day at the wedding. I didn't say a single word in response. I didn't nod, and I certainly didn't apologize. Instead, I slowly reached into my handbag, pulled out a small, high-quality Bluetooth speaker, and placed it right in the dead center of the mahogany table. Victoria frowned, her perfectly manicured eyebrows knitting together in confusion. Ethan let out a loud, dramatic sigh, clearly thinking I was about to play some sort of emotional meditation track or throw a childish tantrum. Without breaking eye contact with my mother, I picked up my phone, synced it to the speaker, and pressed play. The audio quality was crystal clear. It was a secretly recorded conversation from a closed-door meeting Victoria had with a former business partner several years ago, a file I had pulled directly from the hidden depths of my digital evidence folder. Her own sharp, distinct voice instantly filled the quiet private dining room. Through the speaker, Victoria's voice confidently declared that adopting Lena was absolutely the best media strategy she had ever executed. The recording continued, with her explicitly bragging about how buying a disadvantaged orphan had secured her the Humanitarian of the Year award and permanently shielded her company from public scrutiny. The reaction around the table was instantaneous and absolutely explosive. Olivia's jaw practically hit the floor, her eyes wide with pure, unfiltered shock as she stared at her new mother-in-law in absolute horror. Ethan immediately started to panic, his face flushing a deep, angry red as he completely failed to process what he was hearing. Victoria's smug, condescending smile completely vanished, instantly replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. She lunged across the table, desperately trying to grab the speaker, but I calmly slid it out of her reach and turned the volume up even higher that I wasn't finished. As the recording continued to play her disgusting, calculated words, I unzipped my heavy leather tote bag and pulled out a massive, thick stack of printed documents. I slammed them down onto the table with a loud, satisfying thud. I spread the papers out so everyone could clearly see them. They were the undeniable, highly confidential bank records and the absolute physical proof of her extensive money laundering network. That I leaned forward, looking directly into Victoria's panicked eyes, and spoke loudly over the sound of her own recorded voice. I told her that those papers detailed exactly $22 million systematically drained straight from her children's charity fund. I kept my voice incredibly steady, completely devoid of any emotion, and asked her if she wanted to explain that to us, Mom. Victoria completely lost control of her carefully crafted facade. She started screaming, her voice cracking as she frantically grabbed at the bank statements, trying to violently crumple them up and shove them back toward me. She was hyperventilating, entirely unable to form a coherent sentence as her entire world rapidly crashed down around her. Ethan, fully completely brainwashed by years of her manipulation, immediately jumped to her defense. He slammed his hands on the table, leaned over, and aggressively yelled at me, claiming that I was completely destroying our family. That I didn't flinch at his anger. I just looked at my brother, feeling nothing but profound pity for how pathetic and blind he truly was. I looked right back at him and calmly stated that I wasn't destroying anything. I told him that I was simply telling the absolute truth. That was the exact moment Adrian decided to finally enter the conversation. He calmly stood up from his chair, reached into his suit jacket, and pulled out his official press identification badge, tossing it onto the table right next to the scattered bank records. He introduced himself clearly as Adrian Cole, a senior investigative journalist. He then casually informed Victoria and Ethan that every single document on that table, along with gigabytes of other highly incriminating evidence, had already been fully verified and securely sent to 3 major national newsrooms. Victoria froze. All the color instantly drained from her face, leaving her looking completely gray and hollow. She knew exactly who Adrian Cole was. Everyone in her elite corporate circle knew his name, and they knew he absolutely never missed when he went after a target. He looked down at his wristwatch and casually mentioned that the embargo on the story had lifted exactly 2 minutes ago, right on cue, as if the universe itself was orchestrating the timing. Cell phones started buzzing. First, it was Victoria's phone, vibrating violently against the table. Then Ethan's phone started ringing. Then Olivia's. The explosive news was already starting to appear everywhere online. The massive, undeniable scandal was officially breaking across every major media platform in the country, completely unfiltered and impossible to contain. We didn't stay to watch the rest of the meltdown. I quietly packed up my speaker, turned my back on the screaming, chaotic mess of the woman who had tormented me my entire life, and walked out of the restaurant with Adrian. The fallout over the next few days was absolutely spectacular and incredibly swift. Within 48 hours, Victoria was officially under federal investigation by multiple government agencies. The authorities immediately froze every single one of her personal and corporate bank accounts, and the state attorney general permanently suspended the Golden Horizon Foundation, pending a massive criminal audit. Her flawless, meticulously crafted reputation collapsed entirely overnight. She became the most hated woman in the state, a complete pariah in the high society circles she had desperately clawed her way into. The destruction didn't just stop with her. Ethan's medical practice and his pristine public prestige were severely damaged by his close, unwavering association with her crimes. Olivia, completely disgusted and humiliated by the monstrous reality of the family she had just married into, immediately packed her bags and left him, causing their entire newlywed dynamic to violently fracture. The perfect, untouchable Carter family was completely and utterly broken, shattered into a million irreparable pieces for the entire world to see. The media frenzy was unlike anything the city had ever seen. News helicopters literally circled the Silverwood estate, the exact same venue where she had humiliated me just a short time ago. Paparazzi camped outside her corporate headquarters, aggressively snapping photos of heavily armed federal agents carrying out dozens of cardboard boxes filled with hard drives and physical documents. Every single news channel ran continuous, looping segments breaking down the incredibly complex web of offshore accounts and shell companies she had used to steal millions from the very orphans she publicly claimed to protect. Her highly paid crisis PR team, the exact same people who had originally advised her to adopt me as a prop, completely abandoned her, instantly issuing public statements to distance themselves from her criminal actions. She was completely trapped in a nightmare of her own making, publicly exposed as a fraud, a thief, and a monster. Her empire was gone, her money was untouchable, and her golden child was left scrambling to save his own sinking ship. The morning after the dinner at Le Petit Chateau, I woke up in my small apartment feeling completely different. For the first time in my 25 years of life, I actually slept through the entire night without a single nightmare. I didn't wake up in a cold sweat. I didn't feel that familiar, heavy weight of anxiety pressing down on my chest. I just opened my eyes, looked at the ceiling, and realized that I was finally free. The explosive secret I had carried alone for 7 long years was now out in the open, and it was spreading across the world faster than I ever could have imagined. I reached over to my nightstand and picked up my phone. I had dozens of missed calls and hundreds of unread text messages from numbers I didn't even recognize. People who had completely ignored me at my brother's wedding just a few days ago were now desperately trying to contact me. They wanted the inside scoop, They wanted to apologize for treating me poorly, or they simply wanted to associate themselves with the person who took down the great Victoria Carter. I ignored every single one of them. I didn't do this for attention or social climbing. I did this for absolute justice. That I got out of bed, walked into my small kitchen, and made a pot of cheap coffee. I turned on the small television sitting on my kitchen counter and switched it to the local news channel. I didn't even have to wait for the top of the hour to see the massive results of our dinner. My mother's face was plastered across the entire screen. It wasn't one of her glamorous, highly edited PR photos either. It was a harsh, unflattering shot of her looking furious and completely panicked, likely taken by a paparazzo outside her office building late last night. The headline flashing at the bottom of the screen in bold red letters read, "Philanthropist Victoria Carter accused of massive fraud." The news anchors were talking rapidly, their voices filled with absolute shock and thinly veiled disgust. They were reading direct quotes from Adrian Cole's devastating article. Adrian had kept his promise to me. He didn't just publish a quick, sensational blog post. He released a massive, multi-page investigative report simultaneously across 3 of the biggest national news outlets. The articles detailed absolutely everything. He exposed the fake adoption scheme, showing the world that I was literally purchased as a human prop to boost her public image and secure a humanitarian award. He published the offshore routing numbers and the undeniably forged bank records. But most importantly, he explained exactly how she had stolen $22 million directly from the Golden Horizon Foundation. Within a few days, Victoria was officially placed under heavy investigation by multiple government agencies. The state attorney general did not waste any time. The public outcry was so massive and so immediate that they had to act fast to save face. The authorities officially suspended the entire Golden Horizon Foundation pending a massive criminal audit. All of the charity's daily operations were immediately halted. The massive, expensive fundraising galas were completely canceled. The staff was sent home, and the charity's downtown offices were locked and secured by law enforcement. The public was absolutely furious. People who had donated their hard-earned money to help underprivileged children were now realizing that their donations had actually paid for Victoria's luxury cars, her expensive designer gowns, and my brother Ethan's elite medical school tuition. The internet was completely ruthless. Social media platforms were flooded with angry comments, viral videos exposing her past lies, and deep dives into her suspicious business dealings. Her highly paid crisis public relations team, the exact same people who had originally told her to adopt me all those years ago, completely abandoned her. They issued a very brief, incredibly cold public statement declaring that they had officially dropped Victoria Carter as a client and were fully cooperating with the federal authorities. They didn't want to go to prison with her. They left her completely alone to face the massive storm she had created. The financial consequences hit her immediately. The government agencies quickly moved to ensure she couldn't hide or transfer any more of the stolen money. Her massive corporate bank accounts and her personal bank accounts were completely frozen. She couldn't access a single dime of her vast, ill-gotten fortune. Her expensive credit cards were instantly declined. She couldn't pay her massive legal retainers, she couldn't pay her personal staff, and she certainly couldn't pay to maintain her lavish lifestyle at the Silverwood estate. The woman who had spent her entire life obsessing over money and using her massive wealth to bully, control, and silence everyone around her was suddenly left completely broke on paper. It was a spectacular, incredibly fast downfall. Her reputation collapsed completely. She went from being the most respected, beloved philanthropic businesswoman in the entire state to being a complete pariah overnight. Her wealthy friends, her powerful political allies, and her elite business partners dropped her instantly. Nobody wanted to be seen anywhere near her. They completely erased her from their social circles, terrified that the ongoing federal investigation would somehow drag them down too. That I sat at my kitchen counter, drinking my coffee, watching the news coverage loop over and over again. I watched reporters stand outside her massive corporate headquarters, detailing the sheer scale of her financial crimes. I watched former employees come forward on live television, anonymously confirming Adrian's reporting and sharing their own horror stories of working for a ruthless, incredibly abusive boss. The flawless, perfect public image she had violently protected for decades was completely destroyed. The mask was finally ripped off, and the entire world was finally seeing the exact same cold, calculating monster I had been forced to live with my entire life. She was publicly exposed as a massive fraud, a greedy thief who stole from orphans, and a violently abusive mother who treated human beings like disposable objects. I didn't feel any guilt. I didn't feel any regret. I simply felt a deep, profound sense of closure. She had used my brother's wedding, a room full of 800 important guests, and a live microphone to publicly humiliate me and call me a mistake. Now the entire world was her audience, and everyone was watching her absolutely lose everything she had ever cared about, and I could easily imagine what was happening inside the walls of her massive, empty mansion right now. Victoria was a woman who absolutely needed total control. She thrived on manipulating narratives and telling people exactly what to think. Now, she had zero control over anything. She was probably pacing the expensive hardwood floors of her office, screaming into her cell phone, desperately trying to find a lawyer who would actually take her calls. She was probably trying to leverage old favors, threatening former business partners, and demanding that someone, anyone, fix this massive disaster for her. But there was no one left to threaten. The evidence I had given Adrian was far too solid, too undeniable, and too public. There were no loopholes left for her to crawl through. The physical documents and the crystal-clear audio recording from the restaurant dinner were absolute poison to anyone who touched them. She was entirely trapped in a cage of her own making, and the walls were closing in incredibly fast. I spent the rest of that week quietly observing the absolute destruction of her empire from the safety of my apartment. I didn't speak to the press. I declined every single interview request. Adrian handled the media perfectly, keeping the strict focus entirely on the massive financial crimes and the deeply buried corruption, rather than letting the story devolve into a trashy reality television family drama. I didn't need to go on television and cry or tell my side of the story anymore. The hard facts spoke completely for themselves. I had spent 7 years hiding in the shadows, quietly collecting every single piece of paper, every single deleted email, and every single broken lie. I had done the hard, painful work in the dark. Now, I simply got to sit back in the daylight and watch the inevitable consequences finally catch up to the woman who thought she was entirely above the law. Exactly 1 week later, the intense media storm surrounding my family was still raging across every single news channel, but my own personal life had finally become completely quiet. The federal authorities were heavily occupied dismantling Victoria's massive, corrupt empire piece by piece, and I was just trying to figure out what to do with the rest of my completely open future. It was a rainy, cold Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting on my living room couch, drinking a cup of hot tea and staring out the window at the gray city skyline, when I suddenly heard a sharp, aggressive knock at my front door and I wasn't expecting any visitors. I hadn't given my actual apartment address to anyone from my old life, and Adrian Cole was the only person who knew exactly where I lived. I set my mug down on the coffee table, walked slowly over to the front door, and looked through the small glass peephole. My heart actually skipped a beat. Standing right there in the dim, flickering light of the hallway was my mother. Victoria Carter had somehow managed to find out exactly where I lived, and she had come directly to my house. For a brief second, my old, deeply ingrained childhood instincts kicked in. My stomach tightened, and my hands felt a sudden, cold rush of anxiety. But then I remembered exactly who I was now, and exactly what I had accomplished over the last 7 days. I took a deep breath, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled the door wide open. The woman standing on my cheap welcome mat looked absolutely nothing like the terrifying, powerful billionaire I had known my entire life. She was no longer wearing her luxurious, expensive, custom designer dresses. The perfectly tailored suits and the flawless, camera-ready makeup were completely gone. Instead, she was wearing a wrinkled, oversized trench coat that looked like she had slept in it. Her normally perfect, heavily styled hair was flat and disheveled, hanging loosely around her pale face. The dark, heavy bags under her eyes were incredibly prominent, making her look at least 10 years older than she actually was. The cold, calculated arrogance that usually radiated from her every single movement had been completely stripped away, and now there was nothing left but pure, raw desperation. We stood there in absolute silence for a long time, just staring at each other across the threshold of my apartment. I didn't step aside to let her in, and I certainly didn't offer her a polite greeting. I just waited for her to speak. She looked at my face, her eyes violently searching for any tiny trace of the weak, compliant, terrified daughter she used to violently control. But she found absolutely nothing. Her hands were physically shaking as she clutched the edges of her coat. When she finally opened her mouth to speak, her voice wasn't the loud, booming, authoritative command that had humiliated me in front of 800 people at Ethan's wedding. It was a hoarse, weak, and incredibly bitter whisper. "You destroyed my life," she said, her voice dripping with pure venom. She honestly believed it. Even now, after the massive federal raids, after the undeniable bank records proving she stole $22 million from orphans, and after the absolute collapse of her golden boy Ethan's reputation, she still saw herself as the ultimate victim. She fully believed that I was a cruel, jealous villain who had simply decided to ruin her perfect existence out of pure spite. She completely refused to take a single ounce of responsibility for her own horrific, violent, and criminal actions. I looked right into her bloodshot, exhausted eyes. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't even feel the deep, heavy sadness that had haunted me since I was a little girl. I just felt a profound, overwhelming sense of pity for the pathetic, broken woman standing in my hallway. "No," I replied calmly, keeping my voice incredibly steady and completely devoid of emotion. "I just turned on the lights." Victoria flinched as if I had physically slapped her across the face. The absolute, undeniable truth of that statement hit her incredibly hard. I didn't invent the massive, complicated web of offshore bank accounts. I didn't force her to steal millions of dollars from a children's charity. I didn't tell her to hire a dirty, untraceable mechanic to cut the brake lines on my Aunt Elena's car. And I certainly didn't force her to legally purchase a 6-month-old baby from an orphanage just to use as a human prop for a flawless public relations strategy. I didn't create the horrific, violent darkness that she operated in for decades. I simply found the light switch, flipped it on, and forced the entire world to finally see exactly what was hiding in the shadows. She opened her mouth, desperately trying to formulate some kind of defense, some kind of twisted excuse to justify her actions, but the words completely failed her. She just stood there, her chest heaving, looking completely and utterly defeated. The grand, untouchable Victoria Carter had finally run out of lies to tell that I stepped slightly forward, closing the physical distance between us so she could clearly hear every single syllable of my final words to her. I needed to make absolutely sure that she carried this exact thought with her into a federal prison cell. "I was never your mistake," I told her, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet hallway. "I am the consequence of what you did." Those final, heavy words hung in the air between us like a physical weight. I watched the realization slowly wash over her face. For 25 years, she had viewed me as a defective product, a massive PR liability, and a horrible mistake that she should have abandoned when I was a baby. But she was wrong. I was the direct, inevitable result of her own endless cruelty. She had built a massive, fragile empire entirely on lies, manipulation, and violence, and she had unknowingly brought the exact instrument of her destruction right into her own home that I didn't wait for her to respond. I didn't need to hear her cry, and I didn't want to hear her scream. I simply took a step back into my apartment, looked at her one last time, and firmly closed the door directly in her face that I heard the heavy, metallic click of the deadbolt sliding into place, permanently separating my world from hers. I stood quietly in my entryway for a few minutes, listening carefully. I didn't hear her knock again. I didn't hear her yell. After a few moments, I heard the faint, slow sound of her footsteps shuffling down the hallway, getting quieter and quieter until they completely faded away. She was finally gone. As I walked back into my living room and picked up my warm cup of tea, I realized that the heavy, suffocating weight I had carried on my shoulders for my entire life was completely gone. The 7-year plan was officially over. I had finally achieved exactly what I set out to do. I had learned a massive, undeniable lesson from the tragic death of my Aunt Elena and the quiet, sad life of my Grandpa Thomas. The truth can be buried, manipulated, and hidden for a very long time, but it never actually dies. It just waits patiently in the dark. And when it finally appears, absolutely everything and everyone must pay the price. Victoria Carter had finally paid hers, and for the very first time in my life, I was entirely free to start building my own. The heavy, metallic click of a deadbolt sliding into place was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I stood in the entryway of my apartment for a long time, listening to the absolute silence that followed. My mother, Victoria Carter, was gone, and she was never coming back. I had told her the undeniable truth. I was not her mistake. I was the direct consequence of her own actions. The truth had been buried for a very long time, but it had finally appeared, and now everyone involved was paying the massive, unavoidable price. I walked back into my living room, sat down on my couch, and looked around at my small, quiet apartment. I realized almost instantly that I could not stay in this city anymore. The entire state of California was thoroughly infected by her massive, corrupt influence and the explosive fallout of the scandal. I didn't want to walk down the street and see newsstands plastered with her disgraced face. I didn't want to run into people who had attended Ethan's lavish wedding at the Silverwood estate, the exact people who had watched her humiliate me in front of 800 guests. I needed to completely erase this geographic location from my life to truly start over that I didn't waste any time. The very next morning, I went to a local hardware store, bought 20 heavy-duty cardboard boxes, and started packing up my entire life. I didn't have much to begin with, mostly just clothes, books, and some basic kitchen supplies. But when I reached the back of my small bedroom closet, I found something I hadn't looked at in over a decade. It was a dusty, worn black case containing my old wooden violin. I carefully opened the latches and looked at the instrument. The last time I had truly played it was when I was exactly 13 years old, standing on a stage with a cheap gold medal around my neck, staring directly at the empty front row seat that had been clearly reserved for my mother. She had skipped the competition to attend a highly publicized charity gala instead, proving to me that her public image was vastly more important than her daughter. For years, I had completely associated this violin with that painful, shattering realization. But looking at it now, I didn't feel that sharp pain anymore. I carefully closed the case, packed it securely into the trunk of my car, and kept packing. 3 days later, I officially broke my apartment lease, handed my keys back to the landlord, and drove out of the city. I didn't tell a single person where I was going, mainly because I didn't actually know myself. I just got on the interstate and drove north, heading toward the Pacific Northwest. As I crossed the state line, I turned on the car radio. The national news was still heavily covering the massive collapse of the Carter family empire. The reporter on the broadcast casually mentioned that the state attorney general was permanently dissolving the Golden Horizon Foundation after confirming the massive $22 million embezzlement scheme. The broadcast also confirmed that all of Victoria's personal and corporate bank accounts remained completely frozen, and she was officially facing dozens of federal fraud charges. I listened to the report for exactly 1 minute, processing the absolute finality of her destruction, and then I reached out and turned the radio completely off. I didn't need to hear the details anymore. The massive insurance files folder on my laptop was permanently deleted. My 7-year mission was officially over, and I drove for 2 solid days until I found a small, quiet, working-class coastal town in Oregon. It was the exact opposite of the luxurious, high-society world I had been forced to grow up in. There were no massive crystal chandeliers, no expensive catering companies, and absolutely no A-list celebrities. The town was mostly made up of local fishermen, small business owners, and quiet families. I found a small, slightly run-down wooden house for rent near the rocky beach. It had a creaky front porch and a leaky roof, but it was incredibly cheap, and more importantly, it was entirely mine. I signed a 1-year lease using the money I had saved up over the last few years, completely independent of any Carter family wealth that I spent the next few months settling into a completely normal, deeply mundane routine. I got a full-time job working the cash register at a small, independent hardware store in the center of town. I wore comfortable jeans and old flannel shirts every single day. The people in this town had absolutely no idea who Victoria Carter was, and they certainly didn't care about elite philanthropic society drama. To them, I wasn't the adopted human PR prop who had intentionally ruined a perfect family narrative. I wasn't the defective daughter who didn't fit into a manufactured story. I was just Lena, the quiet new girl who worked at the hardware store and always showed up on time. For the very first time in my 25 years of life, I was completely invisible, and it felt absolutely incredible. 6 months after I left California, my cell phone rang. It was Adrian Cole, the investigative journalist who had helped me detonate the massive truth. We had kept in loose contact, and he occasionally called to check in on me. He didn't ask where I was living, respecting my need for total privacy. He just wanted to give me the final, official update on the fallout. He told me that Victoria had formally pled guilty to multiple federal charges to avoid a lengthy public trial, and she had been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. She had completely lost her entire fortune. He also told me that my brother Ethan's medical practice had completely failed due to his ruined reputation, and Olivia had successfully finalized their divorce, completely cutting ties with the Carter family name. I thanked Adrian for everything he had done for me. He told me to take care of myself and hung up the phone. I stood on my creaky front porch, looking out at the cold, gray ocean, and realized that I genuinely didn't feel any lingering anger toward Ethan or Victoria. They were just ghosts now, trapped entirely in a past life that no longer belonged to me. That evening, the house was incredibly quiet. I walked into my small living room, opened the worn black case, and took out my wooden violin. I carefully tightened the bow and tuned the strings. My fingers were completely out of practice, and my calluses had faded away years ago. I stood in the middle of the empty room, raised the instrument to my shoulder, and started to play. I wasn't playing to win a competition, and I wasn't playing to earn a cheap gold medal. I certainly wasn't playing to impress a mother who was never going to show up. I was just playing purely for myself. As the rough, unpolished notes filled the small wooden house, I thought about the only two people from my past who had actually treated me like a human being. I thought about my Aunt Elena, who had bravely warned me that my mother was hiding things that could destroy her, a warning that ultimately cost her her life. I had successfully finished the fight she started. And I thought about my Grandpa Thomas, the only person who had ever truly protected me. He had sat me down in his study and explicitly told me that Victoria didn't hate me, she just hated that I didn't make her look perfect. He was absolutely right. But now, I didn't have to worry about looking perfect for anyone ever again. I was deeply flawed, completely ordinary, and completely free. The long, terrifying nightmare was finally over, and my real life was just beginning. The heavy sound of my apartment door closing was the final punctuation mark on my painful past. I had looked right into Victoria's desperate eyes, a broken woman who no longer wore luxurious dresses but only absolute despair, and told her the undeniable reality of our situation. She had bitterly accused me of destroying her life, but I simply told her that I had only turned on the lights. I had made sure she understood clearly that I was never her mistake, but rather the direct consequence of everything she had done. As she walked away from my door, I finally understood the ultimate message of my entire journey. The truth can be hidden for a very long time, but when it finally appears, absolutely everything and everyone must pay the price. The price Victoria paid was absolute, incredibly swift, and publicly devastating. Within just a few days of our explosive family dinner, the massive federal investigations had effectively ended her life as she knew it. Her massive wealth was locked away as her bank accounts were completely frozen by the authorities. The Golden Horizon Foundation, the children's charity she had used to shamelessly embezzle $22 million, was officially suspended. Her carefully manufactured reputation as a famous, beloved philanthropic businesswoman collapsed entirely, leaving her with absolutely nothing but public disgrace and impending criminal charges. The destruction naturally extended far beyond just Victoria, completely breaking our entire family apart. Ethan, my older brother who had always been the golden boy, the successful doctor, and the absolute pride of the family, completely lost his hard-earned prestige. He had blindly defended her at the dinner table, screaming that I was destroying the family, but his unwavering loyalty to a criminal completely ruined his own professional standing. His beautiful new wife, Olivia Grant, who had been completely shocked by the secret audio recording at the dinner, quickly realized the horrifying truth. She left him immediately, and the perfect marriage that had just been celebrated in front of 800 guests at the luxurious Silverwood estate was permanently destroyed. This massive collapse was the direct result of a 7-year plan that I had meticulously executed in the shadows. The entire operation began the moment I pulled 3 old photographs from my wallet on the side of the road after Ethan's wedding. The first picture was of me at 13 years old, winning a city violin competition while the seat reserved for my mother sat completely empty. She had deliberately skipped my performance to attend a charity gala for press photos, teaching me early on that her public image was always more important than her own daughter. The second picture was of my grandpa Thomas, the only person who had ever truly protected me before he passed away when I was 17. He was the only one who clearly saw the truth, telling me that Victoria didn't hate me. She just hated the fact that I didn't make her look perfect. But the third picture was the true, violent catalyst for the entire explosion. It was a candid photo of my Aunt Elena, the only person in our entire extended family who ever dared to stand up to Victoria's tyranny. She had bravely warned me that my mother was hiding things that could destroy her, and exactly 2 months later, she died in a horrific car crash. The police officially called it a simple accident, but I never believed them for a second. My independent investigation led me to the hidden insurance files folder on my laptop, filled with undeniable bank statements, fake contracts, and secret emails. I eventually found the mechanic's bills proving her car's brakes were intentionally sabotaged by someone working for Victoria's company, cementing my firm belief that Victoria indirectly caused her own sister's death. I had shown all of this to Adrian Cole, the investigative journalist, who warned me that publishing the story would mean my mother would lose absolutely everything. I had looked at him and replied that she took everything from me first. Adrian Cole kept his word, and the documents were sent to 3 major news outlets, triggering the massive downfall. Those encrypted files also contained the cruelest secret of all, the revelation that I was not her biological child, but a 6-month-old baby she adopted from an orphanage purely to build her image as a compassionate woman. I was supposed to be the perfect PR strategy, but when I developed my own personality and didn't fit the narrative, I simply became the imperfect child who ruined her story. That was exactly why she felt justified standing at the microphone during the wedding, publicly calling me her biggest mistake and claiming she should have given me away when I was a baby. She thought she was untouchable. She thought she was just putting a broken, compliant girl back in her place. Instead, she had unknowingly chosen the exact stage for her own total destruction. Please note the following 3 paragraphs regarding Lena's life after closing the door, the specific legal proceedings, and her personal reflections moving forward contain information from outside of the given sources. You may want to independently verify this information. In the long, quiet months that followed that final confrontation at my apartment door, I moved far away from California to a small, rainy town in the Pacific Northwest. I desperately needed to put physical distance between myself and the massive media circus that continued to surround the disgraced Carter family name. Adrian Cole's devastating articles had triggered a relentless wave of severe legal action. I spent many long hours on secure phone calls with aggressive federal prosecutors, meticulously walking them through the encrypted files, the offshore routing numbers, and the undeniable paper trail linking Victoria to the mechanic who tampered with Aunt Elena's car. Victoria's elite, highly paid legal team fought viciously, trying to have the digital evidence dismissed, but the footprint was completely bulletproof. Facing overwhelming odds and the terrifying prospect of a lengthy, deeply humiliating public trial, Victoria eventually took a massive plea deal, resulting in a long, bleak sentence in a federal penitentiary that I didn't celebrate or cheer when the final guilty verdict was officially announced on the national news. I simply packed my old, worn wooden violin into the trunk of my car, drove out to the rocky, isolated coastline near my new home, and quietly watched the cold ocean waves crash aggressively against the shore. I had spent 25 years living in a deeply suffocating environment of lies, vicious manipulation, and relentless psychological abuse. I had been quite literally purchased as a human prop, continuously treated as a massive disappointment, and publicly executed for simply existing. But I had miraculously survived. I had taken the profound, heavy pain of Grandpa Thomas's loss and Aunt Elena's violent, unjust death, and I had slowly, carefully turned it into an unstoppable weapon of absolute truth. Today, my life is incredibly simple, beautifully mundane, and entirely my own. I work full-time at a small local shop where absolutely nobody asks about my wealthy family background or expects me to wear expensive designer clothes. I don't have a massive, overflowing trust fund, but I sleep completely soundly every single night without waking up in a cold sweat. The heavy, dark, suffocating shadow of Victoria Carter no longer dictates my personal worth or my future trajectory. The grand, terrifying monster who used to cruelly control every single aspect of my daily existence is now just a powerless, miserable woman locked away in a concrete cell, completely forgotten and abandoned by the high society world she sacrificed everything to impress. The profound message I took away from this entire ordeal is something I will carry closely with me for the rest of my natural life. The absolute truth is never truly dead. It can be deliberately ignored, it can be violently manipulated, and it can be heavily hidden in the dark for a very long time. But when the blinding light is finally turned on, the fake illusion instantly shatters, and absolutely everything must inevitably pay the massive price. I have finally paid my difficult dues. The heavy debt has been completely settled, and for the very first time in my life, I am stepping forward into the light.